Hello.
Hey.
Kofi, sorry I didn't get to meet you. Oh, I can't hear you. Are you muted?
Me? No, I'm not.
There we go. Everybody see me now.
Yeah.
Yep.
Sorry about that. Perils of a virtual event. We have technical issues sometimes. Hopefully they're solved.
We lost Jacqueline.
Yep. So we're waiting on Jacqueline. We're waiting on our moderator, the person we need most. She'll probably. There we go. Here we go.
Yeah. I was hanging out backstage, wondering where you guys went to.
All right. So we've gotten our quota of technical issues out of the way, so it'll only get better from here. Everybody, thank you for joining us. My name is Justin Bork. I'm one of the volunteers in the Startup Boston team, and all volunteer team, and I'm the MC of the event, which means I'm just going to go through a few quick announcements, and then I will back out and let our moderator Jacqueline take it from there. Few housekeeping items. Number one, you are in the session Startup Stress Management, which about as important of a session as we can get. If this is not the session that you intended to be at, if you want to float around between sessions, or if you just want to plan ahead for the rest of your day and the sessions that you want to go to later, click the agenda button on the top. You're not going to sign out. You'll still be able to hear us and see us in the corner. And you can also view the sessions that are going on at the same time in the future. Really convenient. Also, we really love and encourage questions. So if you have any questions, you'll see on the top right a Q&A tab. That is where you can submit your questions for the panelists. We will see those. We'll make sure they're addressed. Not to be confused with the chat tab. We encourage you to use both, but questions are best in the Q&A tab. It's just easier for us to organize it and see it and make sure it's addressed. The last thing I'll mention is that we do have a contest going on. So if you hear any quotes that you really like, hold on to those, post those onto social media with the hashtag SBW2021, SBW for Startup Boston Week. And you will automatically be entered to win one of 5 $100 gift cards to a local Black-owned business. So we see it as a really great way of supporting the community. You survived my song and dance. I'm going to back out and hand it off to our moderator, Jacqueline Hampton, founder and CEO of Portico. Take it from here, Jacqueline.
Great. Thanks so much, Justin. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We have an amazing panel here today. We have Claudia Zafert, Kofi Frimpong, and Melissa Alert. I'll let them do introductions in just a quick second. But just to remind you, we're here to talk about startup life and founders and stress, and all those words kind of go together synonymously. Startup life is really a juggling act. It's got a wide array of challenges, as I'm sure all of you guys know, and you end up juggling multiple roles, meeting deadlines, teams, work overload, not enough time to sleep, all sorts of different things that you're going through. And sometimes it can feel like an emotional roller coaster. So the question that we're hoping that we can help you with today is, how do you start to identify some of those signs of stress that you might be experiencing as a founder? How can you prioritize your mental health and start to do some work to help balance that work on that work-life balance, but still have time to actually build your company? So it's all about balance, and hopefully we'll give you a few tips and tricks as you kind of go through today, because I know it can be incredibly hard to achieve, speaking as a founder myself. So just really quickly, I'm the founder of Portico Travel. Portico is your ultimate travel organizer. We're trying to disrupt the world of Google spreadsheets and those tedious hours that you spend saving all your ideas for travel and bouncing back and forth between maps, and giving you a single place to save, share, and plan all of your amazing adventures with your friends. So why don't we go through a quick round of intros. Claudia, you're next on the screen to me, so I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Claudia Zafert. I'm a clinical psychologist and a startup founder. I started my career as a psychiatry faculty at Dartmouth Medical School, and then a few years ago, after years of doing research and teaching and operating a mental health clinic in an academic medical center, I switched paths and I founded Evermind. Evermind is a digital mental health startup. We're using technology that was developed for NASA to help astronauts manage their mental health in remote space, to expand access to science-backed treatments for people on Earth. So I came to this panel both as a professional and a startup founder myself, though I should make a disclaimer that anything that advice I provide here today is not really medical advice, and you ought to seek professional help if you need it.
Great, thanks, Claudia. Kofi, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. I'm Kofi. I'm the co-founder of Seshi. Our platform curates live and interactive virtual workshops, learning and develop workshops for your team based on employee insights and data. We just finished TechStars last year. And, I've been in the startup space for a long time. I went to Princeton after graduating. I worked at numerous startups, particularly in business development and as an analyst. And I've gotten a real opportunity to work for startups that have raised over 50 million, and then those that have raised $1 million and are barely trying to figure out product market fit. So a wide range of experiences and experience from all of that, from just working and then obviously having my own startup as well. So yeah.
Great, thanks. Marissa?
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Marissa Alert. Like Claudia, I'm also a clinical psychologist, and currently I'm working at Johns Hopkins Healthcare Solutions, and I serve as the Associate Director of Product Development there. We're not officially a startup, but certainly function like one, and so I also bring that experience. And this past year, I launched an e-commerce store for earrings, so I have a bit of that experience in the bag as well, and I'm really looking forward to this chat.
Wonderful. Thanks, everybody. I'm excited to get some professional opinions and some personal opinions as we go through this, because I know both of those are important as we each try to kind of figure out our own way. As we start to get a better sense of the audience and who's here, I have a feeling we have a fair number of founders, perhaps not everyone, but I'd love to open a poll just to get a sense as to what are some of the stressors that people are experiencing right now. So you should see that on your screen now, and I'll give people just a minute or so to answer that. Right, so as people are putting in their last answers, I'm going to ask the technical question. You guys just see the poll, you don't see the percentages, correct? All right, we still have a few last responses coming in, so I'll close the poll in just a couple seconds. Okay, great. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. Okay, so I'm not sure if I know how to share the results, so I'll tell you guys the results. How about that? So the number one stressor was juggling multiple roles, which came in at 43%. Number two was uncertainty of the future, then not enough time, and then managing my team. So I'll give the panel a second just to absorb that. But I think that gives us some good context as to kind of what people are experiencing right now. So I'd love to take a step back and hear from some of the experts too. So Claudia, Marissa, I'm going to direct this question to you. But from your research and from also your experience in working at startups, what do you see as the leading stressors for a startup founder?
Yeah, I can go ahead and start with that. Don't have direct founder experience, but just based on, what the research shows, I think some of the responses here certainly echo and reflect what people find as major stressors in terms of managing time. That's not, uncommon, but also juggling multiple roles. As a founder, you're not just dealing with managing your team. So you're not only serving as a supervisor, you're serving as, the CEO, you're serving also roles outside of work. So that might mean, you have a family, you have friends, you're trying to maintain those social ties as well. And so certainly trying to manage all of that can be stressful, especially when you recognize that, your roles and responsibilities don't just stop once you finish your 9 to 5 or once you finish working on your company. And so trying to manage that while thinking about the success of your company, thinking about your employees as well, thinking about funding. There are a lot of things that, as a founder, you're dealing with. And so stress is going to be a common theme, but the important thing I think to remember is not that, I'm stressed out, this is awful, but how do I actually go about managing it effectively?
Well, I'll chime in here. I haven't conducted any research directly on the stress of startup founders, so I'll speak from my firsthand experience that I wholeheartedly agree with the response to the poll that juggling multiple roles is my number one stress. I feel like I'm on a merry-go-round every day, going from one area of the company to another and constantly switching tasks and maybe not getting completion on many things before I have to move to the next. So I think that kind of demand is one of the things that makes being a founder, set apart from the rest of the team, because each of the other team members is focusing on one area and we have to look at everything. And that's a major source of stress. And then the second thing on the poll was the uncertainty. And that really resonates with me as well, that there is this constant uncertainty about what next and the unpredictability. So these are things that one should be prepared for, I think, going into the startup life, that there's going to be a great deal of uncertainty. And, for me, it's a good direction in terms of the juggling multiple roles, because I get bored easily. But on the other hand, there's a point when it becomes really quite hectic. And I think that's something that we have to learn to adapt to. The other thing I would say that's really a big stress for founders is that sense that in every area, it's the buck stops here with me. And I have the final say in everything and the responsibility for everything. And that does get wearing. So I think that's something that wasn't mentioned in the poll that is relevant as well.
Great, thanks so much. So founders in the audience, you are in good company and you're feeling very normal. And these are all things that happen to us. As Claudia mentioned on the juggling multiple roles, I find it interesting. I don't know if you guys have heard of Gallup Strength Finders. I've done it in the past. And one of my top strengths is a learner. And I think in many ways that's very important for a founder, because you do have to juggle all of these multiple roles, and whatever, on your team is missing, you have to be the one to figure out how do you solve that, whether it's maybe not development, you can't always do that. But if it's marketing or if it's user experience or customer service, you're constantly needing to learn in terms of what's best. So you start to know a little bit about a lot of things, throw SEO, SEM, and a bunch of things in there as well. Kofi, I'm going to turn it over to you because I'm curious, given your perspective in running Seshi, we've talked a little bit now about some of the stressors that founders have, but what are your clients saying to you, and how is that perhaps kind of moving out into the teams? Are some of those stresses flowing out into an early stage startup team as well, or what are they saying?
Yeah, I think that it's inevitable that the stresses kind of get relayed onto the team. And I think any company that's transparent and open with their team, especially at an early stage company, is able to be, somewhat honest with their team about where they stand as a company, or what they're, even not even just as a company, or what people are going through personally. And I've seen this, for myself with my own team I'm running. I've seen this, with companies that have had tons of employees, and then I've seen this with early stage startups, that have 8, 10 team members trying to build something great, right? And I think that the biggest thing you have to understand is, even if you're not directly relaying the stresses that you're dealing with as a founder to your team, it's very obvious. I think to team members, whether there's little subtle hints or certain things that are going on. So I think it's important for founders to be cognizant of where they are in terms of their mental state and how they might be, communicating or portraying what they're going through to their team. Because, I've worked, for startup founders where you could just tell, the founder is stressed out, and now I'm stressed out, and I'm wondering, well, is this company going to last 8 to 10 months, or are we going to finally hit product market fit and get to where we need to go? And these are things that early stage founders deal with all the time. I know you see all the fundraising announcements of this company raised this many millions or that many millions, but if you ever talk to these founders behind the scenes, they're scared and they're trying to figure it out. That's the normal reaction. So I think I think it definitely is relayed onto the team. I think team members are able to feel that, and I think it's important for founders to be conscious of how they react to their stress. So yeah.
Great, thanks. So with that said, you talked about how we display it to our team, and I know it's certainly something that I think about with my own team in terms of kind of where my outlets are for getting my stress out such that we can have productive team meetings. I'd love to open another poll, which talks a bit about how does stress manifest in your life? So what are some of the physical signs that you're seeing in terms of how stress is expressing itself? So let me go ahead and publish that one too. All right, it looks like the answers are flying in, but I'll give it just one more minute. Okay, so thanks everybody for your comments before. So I know you can see the percentages now on the screen, which is great. So it looks like this one is split more across the board. And it could be that people really wanted to do multiple choice as opposed to single choice on this one. I know for myself, a couple of them popped to mind, but we definitely have some difficulty sleeping, the feeling of being overwhelmed, and then the irritability and becoming easily frustrated with other people seem to be the top three that pop up here. So I would love to move on to what I think people really want to get out of today, is to start to get some nuggets of, okay, now we've identified the stress, we see how it starts to manifest in our own bodies, but what can we actually do about it to be able to start to bring those levels of stress down? So I'd love to ask all three of you, frankly, what are some possible ways that you think about to manage the stress? So what can people start to do on a regular basis to kind of keep themselves, I would say, as sane as possible? We certainly can't get rid of it always completely. And then as a follow-on, if you hit a stumbling block, so let's say that the methods you're using stopped working at some point in time, what do you suggest that people do? So I will popcorn it over to Marissa first, and then we'll circle around.
Yeah, I love that you started off with that poll, because I think one of the important aspects of stress management is actually being able to recognize when you're stressed, right? A lot of people go around, they're frazzled, and it's not until someone is like, hey, I think you're really stressed out, that they realize, oh, like maybe I am. And so I think that awareness is critical, because if you're not aware that you're stressed, it's going to be virtually impossible for you to start taking, active measures to cope with it. And so with that being said, I don't like prescribing any specific techniques, because the thing about stress management is that there are a ton of things that you can do. And so what's more important is just focusing on things that won't actually add to your stress, but will relieve it. And so if thinking about meditating, causes you anxiety, then maybe that's not the first thing that you can or should turn to. And so there are a lot of options out there. You can turn to creative things such as, painting, drawing, getting active. And one of the simple ones that I love is deep breathing. It's highly effective, and it's something that you can do at any time. But apart from that, I think, having multiple strategies and what I like to call your coping toolbox. So, and the reason for that is that, perhaps taking a bath is something that you love to do and really calms you down when you're at home. But if you're in the midst of a really stressful team meeting, it's not like you could be like, hey guys, you know what, I need to take a bath. That's not an option. And so I think having multiple strategies that you can turn to that can help you in different situations is really helpful. Again, what those strategies are will depend on you and what works for you, and also importantly, what fits into your life. And then lastly, the thing I think is important when we think about stress management is to manage our expectations, right? Do we have realistic expectations in terms of what we should or shouldn't be able to do? And to recognize that what we're able to accomplish can look very different depending on our circumstances. And so I think a lot of the stress that we often feel is because of perceptions that we have about what we should be able to do, how we should be able to compete and, stay up to par with other people. And so I think really managing our expectations for ourselves, for the people around us, is really critical. And just quickly before I turn it over to everyone else, when we think about how do we know that we're stuck, I think once we've tried all these things and they're not working, oftentimes people like to run into the same wall. Something's not working, so they just run a little harder into it. Same thing with our strategies. If they're not working, it's important for us to pivot, to really reflect on, is the thing I'm dealing with or struggling with something that I can actually change, or something that I need to think about how I can cope with.
Great, thanks. Claudia or Kofi, you want to go next?
Sure, I'll jump in, following off on these excellent suggestions from Marissa. I think an important aspect of the mindset around this is to adopt an acceptance mindset, that accepting of stress, first of all, because stress is part of startup. There's no getting around that. And the more that we fight it and, resist, then that typically makes things worse. So I think just accepting the stress, and then accepting that mistakes will happen, for example, that, it's never going to be 100% perfect. And, our decisions aren't always going to be correct. And we need to find ways to just pick up and move on, recognize when we've made a mistake and move on, and accept that those mistakes will happen and they aren't necessarily devastating. Another thing that is important to accept is that you just can't control everything and everyone and everything happening in your company. and sort of letting go of that sense that if you don't control it all, then, things aren't going to go the way they ought to. Letting other people make decisions and have a say in things is important. Turning to another area of the mindset, I would say that it's very important to recognize that the sources of stress can be looked at in terms of problems that we need to solve and emotions that we need to resolve. And you need to use problem solving when problem solving is needed. And when it's an emotional situation that you have to process on that emotional roller coaster, find the emotional processing strategies that work. If you apply emotional coping strategies to problems or problem solving to emotions, they aren't going to work. So recognizing that, especially on the emotional side, I think that there are some things that we can't fix. They aren't problems to solve. When you have a big disappointment, you lose a customer, or something doesn't work out, sometimes it isn't a problem to fix, but you need to process that disappointment. And the feelings that you have around that and move on. Another area that I think is really important is learning to triage and prioritize because this merry-go-round that we're on, this constant changing roles and constantly being bombarded with different problems that we have to solve. And not everything that's urgent is important. And we need to keep ourselves focused on what's important, even if it's not urgent. And so finding ways to continually prioritize and also then delegate to other people wherever you can. And I'm with Jacqueline that very often it means that we've had to learn new skills that weren't in our skill set to solve the problems ourselves. But often we have to find other people to do that for us. And, you know, building a company is essentially bringing on more and more people to your team until everybody else is doing everything and you're doing just the stuff at the top. And so that's a gradual process, and learning how to delegate is often difficult when we've been used to doing everything ourselves. And then finally, I would say being ready to acknowledge when we've met our milestones, because I think too often we're just continually focused on moving ahead and not stopping and recognizing even the small milestones and rewarding them for ourselves and for our team to keep that morale going. So that's another important aspect of it. And I'll turn it over to Kofi.
Yeah, I mean, listening to Marissa and Claudia, it's like very, I mean, the suggestions are great. And from a clinical perspective, I guess for me as a startup founder, the big thing that's really, really helped is really being a part of community of founders who are, I'd say, not only at the same level as you, but maybe, you know, a step or two past you, so you can kind of look ahead to see who you're dealing with, or look ahead to see, you know, what the potential stresses are in the future. You know, for me, for example, I was part of an accelerator program, Techstars. I'm also part of other communities. So I find like when most startup founders are stressed, they like to be able to have someone to talk to, you know, and when you talk to other founders at different stages, some at the same as you, some beyond you, you're able to really understand that like what you're going through is a lot more common than you think, and that there are ways to, you know, to get over the hump or whatever stressors that are giving you issues. So for me, like being a part of community is super important. I can't tell you how many times I've been in, you know, Zoom meetings with founders who, you know, are all talking about all types of things, whether they've had to fire people, or they're struggling to get product market fit, or they have 2 months left of runway and they had raised a few $1 million a year in years past, and wondering, you know, like, how am I going to pay my employees past 2 more months? And I think, you know, for me, that has been a really great way to just relieve stress and be able to communicate with people and talk to different people in that nature. Another thing for me, I mean, maybe this goes without saying, I don't know, but like focusing on you know, exercising, sleeping well, and eating well, something that honestly I wouldn't even say I do the best job of, but recently I've noticed how much happier I am when I put it, you know, on myself to prioritize working out 3 times a week. When I turn off my phone at certain times, or when when I'm going to sleep and I put it on do not disturb, so that I'm not, you know, answering emails late at night or things like that. I just noticed that, you know, working on those things has made me happier, has definitely helped to relieve stress in different ways. And I'm thinking, man, if certain things aren't going well in the business, at least I'm eating well and I'm in shape, and I have that to look to. It kind of, I know it's made me happier. So, you know, I definitely suggest that, whether it's, you know, I've gotten a personal trainer now to force myself to work out, which has helped. And then eating. I've been working on meal prep with a chef that's really helped. And if you can't do that, that's fine. There's other alternatives, but making those a priority has really helped for me. So yeah, from my perspective, community, strong network, strong support, whether it's other founders, your investors, your advisors, and then sleeping, eating, exercising, and making those priorities have really helped me personally.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. That was a lot to digest and a lot of great things to help us remember and think through, whether it's accepting that stress is just going to be there and it's not going to disappear, kind of tampering our expectations. We're all a bit of perfectionists probably in some way, and we all have to remember that perfection is often the enemy of progress. So how do we pull back from that a little bit so that we can move forward? Kofi, you just touched on this in terms of exercise, but one thing I also want to remind people is figure out a way to take a break. You need to figure out how you can disconnect from that stress. I say this having spent 7 years in investment banking in my prior career, and I can tell you that it wasn't until I left investment banking that I realized that my shoulders had been tense for 7 years straight. And hopefully it's not that extreme for anyone, but it taught me a good lesson to think about in terms of kind of how I manage my stress now. And as Marissa mentioned, those are individual ways. It can be meditation, it can be a walk with friends. There's all sorts of different things it can be. It's really up to you. And if you're in that crowd that says you can't meditate, I would ask you whether or not you've ever zoned out while driving a car. And if you have, you've meditated, you probably shouldn't do it that way, but it is a form of it. You can also do it. I know for me over the summer, like Kofi, I make time for tennis on a court. My phone's nowhere near me. I don't care if I win or lose, as long as I play okay. And it's just a fun way to get a full break. One of the things I've been doing recently, and I know it feels impossible, and it does feel impossible to me too, is I try to close my computer at 9 o'clock. Nothing's that critical, because I'm a morning person, not a night person. Nothing's that critical. Can I just shut it, get up the next morning, have a fresh perspective? Because I've found if you don't get the break away, you start becoming less productive over time. So just some other quick thoughts to think about. So I want to remind people the Q&A is there. Please feel free to pop questions into there. We can throw them in as we go along. We'll also save some time at the end for those as well. But let's keep moving along. So as startup founders, or frankly, anything in life, we're not meant to do everything on our own. And so there are resources that we can turn to. It could be books that we read, people that we talk to, digital resources. There's all sorts of different things that are out there. Kofi alluded to this in terms of the community. I described it in a couple different ways as I move along through my startup journey. In the beginning, I used to say I needed my cheerleaders for my startup journey. So any day where I was thinking, oh, why am I doing this? I'm not quite sure about this. Who did I call to kind of pep me back up? And in the beginning, it was a couple people who just really believed in the mission and Portico and where we're going. Now we've migrated into where we have over 6,000 users on the platform. So now it's users. It's when I get a note from a user or I talk to a user who says, oh my gosh, I've been looking for this forever. I'm so excited I found it. The other day, it was a mobile developer who said, oh, I tried to build this and it was so hard. I love what you've done. It's amazing. Whether it's someone who's kind of keeping you motivated or moving into a community of other founders that you can bounce ideas off of, those are all really important things. And you can create those. So I used to send out emails to 2 to 3 people that I knew were founders with questions that I had to get answers. Now I'm fortunate to be in a couple different Slack communities to do stuff. But there's a bunch of different possibilities out there. And so I just wanted to toss that out to the panel. Kofi, you mentioned communities already, but are there other resources that have helped you along your journey or that you would suggest that people take a look at?
Yeah. I think that, for me, I'll start, the best has definitely been, community. And, I know I mentioned accelerator programs and things like that, but honestly, you can go on Twitter and find so much advice and insight from people who've been in the same boat as you. And I find that to be, incredibly helpful as well. I think that one thing I want to note is there is tons of advice coming at you from all different directions. And what I've learned is you have to take the advice, and use your own judgment as to what makes sense for you and your company. I've had like a pitch deck when I was fundraising and had, one person suggest to me to do the deck in one way and someone do it in a completely other way. And these are both very successful, people in their own right. You have to kind of use your own judgment as well, in terms of getting that help. And then, in terms of other digital resources, there's so much out there. I think you need to look at your business, whether it's SaaS or a marketplace or D2C, and find founders or experts or people in these spaces off of YouTube, off of Twitter, off of just online, and connect with them, and then also look at the journeys that they've been through and see what you can take from that. I give this example all the time. If you ever get a chance, look up the journey of where the Airbnb founders came from. It's documented all online. They were going to shut down. They were almost going to give up, and seeing the path that they went. And I'm just using them as an example to say that we're in a day and age now where people are taking the time to document their journey and document what they've gone through. Look up their story, look up the resources, look up how they went from 0 to 1, how they scaled, what acquisition tactics they used, how they handled, competition, all these types of things. I think there's so many resources online, and you can get insights from people. So that's kind of what I've been able to use, and you'll be surprised what's out there and available for free for you to be able to utilize for your own startup.
Great, thanks. Claudia or Marissa, anything that you want to toss in?
Yeah, I think just to chime in, what Claudia mentioned earlier on about acceptance, I think, when we think about seeking resources, I think there needs to be some acknowledgement on our own part that we do need help and that we actually can't do it all alone, and that is okay. Like, that's the norm. And so with that being said, I think when it comes to seeking support, again, that awareness piece comes in. You need to have a clear sense of what you need, right? Where do you need help? Do you need someone that you need to just bounce ideas off of? Do you need someone to just vent to about how stressful things are? Do you need someone to problem solve with you? Do you need someone who has a lot more information, than you do, and you need some guidance? And so I think once you're able to hone in on what kind of help you need, then that certainly helps to narrow things down in terms of who you should reach out to. And I think the thing about seeking support is to remember that just because someone isn't able to provide one type of support doesn't mean that they can't be there for you in other ways. Like, I'm sure people, like, you're venting and all they want to do is talk, and you just need a moment to yourself. You don't want any advice. You just need someone to listen to. And so figure out who that person is. If you're constantly going to the same person who isn't able to give you the support you need, then you're going to find yourself frustrated and return to this idea of, I just need to do it myself. And so I think it's essential for us to be able to match the type of support we're seeking with the type of support that we need. Like, you're not going to go to a mechanic and expect them to do your nails, right? Same way we should approach our resources when we're seeking help as well.
Great, thank you. Claudia, anything? You look like you're about to say something. No?
Oh, I think these are all excellent suggestions, and I'll put a plug out there for startup communities, which I think has been a great resource for connecting with other founders. I think that's really important to connect with other founders.
Awesome, thanks. I'll put a plug out for Startup Boston Week too, because I think through the chat and just through other events that they have during the year, those are all things that are really great resources for us, for frankly anyone at any stage in a startup, and places that you can find other companions or people who might be experiencing the same thing that you can kind of talk to as well. So we've talked a little bit about some of the stressors that we can see in our life and how they kind of physically manifest ourselves. And we all know, I think, that startup life often creeps over those time boundaries, especially with remote work. It becomes harder. So we may end up taking a run at lunch, but that means we end up working late at the end of the day. So are there other signs that we should be looking for that we don't have balance? And how do we create that healthy balance? And then the second part of that question is, how do you recognize when things have just gone too far and perhaps you need more help?
Were you going to?
Go for it, Kofi.
Oh, okay, sure. Yeah, this is an interesting question for me because I think it's still something that I'm constantly working on. I think it's easy to get really caught up. So I'm not saying I have this mastered in any capacity because I think you're just going so hard at your startup. You sometimes allow certain things to slip. But I realize for me, I have like certain aspects of my life that I consider priorities, and I notice that, you know, if my startup or business creeps into them, it kind of forces me to reassess. Like, to give you an example, if my mom says she hasn't heard from me in some time, or like I have family members, for me, and that's me personally, I'm like, okay, well, what's going on here? Because, you know, am I neglecting something that I consider a priority in my life? Or, you know, like I mentioned before, if I'm starting to get out of shape, or I start to think to myself, well, you know, I know the primary reason I'm probably getting out of shape is because there's something in me that says, well, let me just skip this session so I can, you know, get work done or things like that. And I've labeled that in my life, those things in my life, family, eating healthy, being healthy, as priorities. And when things start to slip in those ends, I know it's usually because of work. And I start to really reassess certain things. I think maybe the problem that I have that I'm admitting is that I let it get to that point first, and I don't think I should. I should probably, you know, reassess as it's approaching that point. Not, you know, my mom calling me saying she hasn't heard from me, she's worried for me, what's going on. And I'm just, you know, saying this to say that I think this is something that all founders go through in terms of, you know, in terms of going, you know, maybe too overboard on their startup and not worrying about other aspects of their life. So, yeah, I would say, you know, for me, the way I reassess and look at things is I usually end up taking a step back and looking at, you know, how I can make sure that what I call priorities are not going to get superseded by just me saying, well, I'm running a startup and I'm trying to, you know, do X, Y, and Z. So it doesn't matter if I don't communicate with my family, or if I don't, you know, eat healthy or exercise. So yeah, I think it's important, you know, to just label what you consider priorities in your life, and how, you know, your startup can kind of mesh with those priorities, and making sure that it doesn't creep, you know, into those things. So that's for me personally, how I've been dealing with this.
Great. But I do think it's a hard balance because, Claudia, you mentioned this earlier, but we end up juggling so many different roles and thinking through so many different things that I find you also end up second guessing yourself lots of times, because should I have done a little bit more? Should I let this person take this and move forward because I'm not supposed to have control over everything? And sometimes that running stream of thoughts just keeps going and keeps going and keeps going. And it's like, and if you're working remotely, it's hard sometimes to kind of pull back from that, I think. And you may end up second guessing yourself. Am I too stressed out? What should I be doing about it? And you kind of end up in this cycle. So Claudia, Marissa, maybe I'll turn it over to you around this kind of, you know, work-life balance signs. When do you think that cycle that runs in our mind becomes too much, such that perhaps we need to seek out more professional help or do something different?
Well, I'll jump in there. I think that what Kofi is describing is really important, you know, paying attention to where in your life things aren't, like, you're not adhering to your priorities. And if that evolves to not really functioning in that area, like really not having any relationships, or you know, not doing any self-care, you know, that could be a sign that things are kind of getting out of hand. Also, the point about really sort of developing that self-awareness, taking time to step back and notice. And we've been talking a lot about that throughout this discussion here, that, you know, being aware of how does stress manifest. And for many of us, and I saw that in the poll, it manifests in terms of our internal chatter, you know, the things that we're saying to ourselves day in and day out. And it's very valuable to practice being aware of that chatter and noticing how it's responding to daily events. And if you see that start to move in a direction where it's extremely negative, making a lot of negative interpretations about yourself and your performance, or about your team members, other people, you know, that might be a source of some of the irritability, the frustrations that we face. When you start seeing that move into a more negative direction, and you find you can't break out of it, you know, that might be a sign to get outside help. So I'll let Marissa chime in as well here.
Yeah, 100% agree with everything that Claudia mentioned. And I think another important note is to recognize that if we're doing, you know, we're turning to our normal strategies, they have been effective, but we find that, you know, what we're doing just isn't cutting it anymore. I think that's a great indicator. And just to briefly touch on some of the misperceptions perhaps about seeking mental health treatment, you know, I can't leave this without saying that, you know, it's completely fine. I think people may feel as if like I need to have something really drastic happen, or I need to wait until like I hit rock bottom before seeking help. And I like to think that, you know, prevention is always better than cure. And so if you find that you're struggling, you know, I encourage you to not wait until you have struggled so much that things start to unravel, but that you seek help sooner. And the thing about mental health providers is that they can help you with any aspect of your life, whether that's with coping with stress, or whether that's with, you know, managing multiple roles, whether it's you're feeling really down, or you have that, you know, internal chatter that's waking you up at 3 a.m, you know, every night. These are all things that you don't have to deal with alone, and that you can seek help. And I believe later on, we're going to share some resources that you can turn to in the event you're having a mental health crisis, you're having thoughts about taking your life, or, you know, anything related to that. But I do encourage people to really think about, you know, what's not working. Are they able to solve this problem on their own, as Claudia mentioned earlier? And if not, you know, to seek appropriate help. And that might mean turning to a professional. It might mean turning to your community, whether that's, you know, accelerator programs, other founders as well. But I think, you know, we do ourselves a disservice when we feel as if we can't, we can't seek help, or we shouldn't, or that that's bad, or it makes me look weak, or that it's something I should be ashamed of.
Great, thank you guys. I think it's particularly important to know that you're not in this alone. There's always someone out there that can help you around any aspect of being a founder, frankly. You know, and there's two concepts that are talked about a lot in business these days. I think one is transparency, in terms of how transparent do you want to be with your company, in terms of sharing financials, kind of direction of the company, everything that's going on around it. The other is a concept of vulnerability. And Brene Brown probably helped kick this off and kind of bring it to the light. But there's a lot of talk about being vulnerable and open with your team to build and develop a rapport, and also show that you're human, you know, as you're kind of building that culture and building the community of your company. But I think that as startup founders, sometimes it can be confusing as to how those two concepts work together. And everything that we've just talked about, you know, in the last 50 minutes is about stress and the level of stress that you're carrying as a founder. And Kofi already admitted earlier that stress is going to show highly likely to your employees. And so I think there's a really interesting question, because being transparent with your team about the company is very different than being transparent with them about your own emotional state. And if they potentially get too worried about the stress that you're experiencing, they may start to have doubts about the company. So there's this interesting little, you know, wobbly bridge that we walk over in terms of what do we disclose, how much do we say, kind of how do we handle that? And would love to get thoughts on you guys from that.
Yeah, I'll go. I think it's been really interesting to see. I don't know how new this is, but you know, the fact that founders feel a lot more willing to be vulnerable and transparent about the status of the company is super interesting to me. I feel like 7, 8, maybe even 7 to 8 years ago, if you were working at a startup, everyone is killing it. Everyone's doing so great. Life is perfect. You wouldn't even know what's going on. So the biggest thing I think for me, and I'm just thinking about like different experiences with my own company, and then obviously working for different stage companies, is I've always appreciated founders that were transparent, but I think it's important for them to also understand how much their team is capable, how capable their team is able to like take this information in. Like if you tell your team like, hey, we got 3 months of runway left, and I'm not sure where we're gonna get money from. Is your team gonna all of a sudden go into a downward spiral, or are they gonna bond together and figure things out? I think it's up to founders to understand, how their team members are going to react to this, and of course, you still want to be transparent and you still want to be vulnerable, but I think being able to relay the information in a way where your team is best able to take this is really important. Just give the story real quickly. I work for this startup called Halo. I don't know if any of you remember it, but they had raised like 50 million. It was an app to hail taxi cabs, and we were right in the heat of competing with Uber and Lyft. And right when we decided to launch in New York, Uber knew when we were going to launch, and pretty much decided that they were going to make their app free for our customers for like 2 weeks. So obviously our entire launch was just like a failure. And it was really interesting to see how the CEO navigated that. And he was just super upfront about it, and super vulnerable about how the launch was a failure, how Uber had pretty much crushed us for those 2 weeks. And it was really interesting how every one of us reacted to it. We kind of doubled down on what was going on. We increased marketing. We did a lot more outreach, and we pretty much essentially tried to continue to build a better product and have better customer service. And I could have imagined how maybe if it was a different type of team or different team members, how we all could have just been devastated that something we had worked on for several months just had a massive failure for a launch. So I think being vulnerable, being transparent is good, but being able to understand how capable your team is of taking that information and making sure you relay in a way where you get optimal results is the most important thing, and the biggest thing that I would suggest for founders, especially early stage when everything is just a roller coaster ride. Do you want to continue to just relay information away where you're bringing your team on that roller coaster ride? I think it's important to kind of know how to relay that information. So yeah.
Well, I'll pick up the thread from there. I think it's really important to distinguish between that transparency around the business and transparency about your own emotional state and your own emotional needs. And I think so. For me, it's like keeping some boundaries, and that's because you're the leader of your team, and they're looking to you for guidance, and it's your job to make them coherent and to perform well and be successful. And I think being honest and upfront about what's happening in the business, that's giving them information that helps them feel like, okay, they know where things stand. That's different than if you're having a really bad day and you're disclosing too much about your emotional state. That might lead some of your team members to question, your stability and they might start worrying about you and your mental health. And that's not what you want. That doesn't serve the goals of building that cohesive and high performing team. So I think it's really important to keep that boundary and to seek other resources to take care of your own mental health.
Great, thanks. And to Marissa's point from earlier, seek the resources earlier you don't need to be at the bottom point to go out and to reach for help. So it could be, as Kofi said, talking to other founders. It could be that you want to talk to somebody professionally and you want it to be completely private. So whatever you say, no one ever hears about, whatever works for you. It is better to seek that earlier, I think, in the process, so that you have kind of an established rhythm, so that you never get to that low. So if you have any burning questions, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A. We just have a few minutes left. Marissa, I'm going to try to figure out how to publish that document so everybody can see it, or Justin might be able to help me publish that document so everybody can see it. But otherwise, I'd love to just ask for a quick round of, if you had one suggestion today, parting advice for founders. We've talked a lot about accepting the stress, managing your expectations, knowing that you can't control everything. How do you prioritize things? Thinking about what your milestones really are and kind of asking for help when you need it. But all of that kind of as a backdrop, if there's one suggestion you would have for founders that you're going to leave them with today, something that could help manage that stress that they could do on a weekly basis or on a daily basis, what would that be?
Well, I'll start. I think self-care is really the building block of everything else. So with that in mind, make sure that you're keeping 1 hour every day for yourself, 1 day every week, and 1 week every 6 months. And that you adhere to that and taking care of yourself.
Yeah, I'd say, start small. When we think about, again, stress management, it shouldn't be something that, makes us a lot more stressed. And we can take very little steps, whether, perhaps even starting with an hour might be too much. If you can carve out 5, 10, 15 minutes for starters, if that seems too overwhelming. If you've been dying to try something, committed to doing it, at least once or twice, not for like 6 to 10 months. And I just think just remaining flexible, understanding that things are going to change and that it's okay for your priorities to shift, for you to change. And I think, as Claudia mentioned earlier, just acceptance and awareness.
I think, something that I'll say that I don't really do a good job of, that, a founder had told me about, was, you're going to be stressed all the time. And I think it's important to celebrate, like, even the smallest of wins that you get. I have a tendency to, get a win and just say whatever, like, cool, that's part of it, just keep going. And then sometimes I'll look back, and some of my team members have even noted to me before, like, man, this was a great accomplishment, this is that. And I'm realizing I just kind of gloss over it sometimes. I think it's important to, like, try to enjoy the journey and enjoy even the smallest of wins, because you're going to be stressed out all the time. And I think that enjoying the journey, understanding, that there's growth and that there's going to be, some ups and downs is going to keep you level-headed, and never getting too high or too low. So yeah, I'd say try to celebrate even the small wins that you get in whatever capacity you can.
Awesome. Those are all amazing suggestions. Thank you so much. I'll add one quick one, which is just get outside every day, even if it's raining. If you live in the city, walk around the block. If you live in the suburbs, walk around your neighborhood. Just that breath of fresh air and that deep breathing that we've alluded to earlier, kind of take a couple deep breaths on that walk as a way to just try and reset. So I know we're ending, unfortunately, we're getting close to the end of our time, because we could sit here and talk about this all day long, but hopefully everybody on the call got some great suggestions. One, know you're okay. It happens. We're right there with you. And there are lots of different ways to start to manage the stress and to figure out ways to address that so that you can continue being incredibly productive and building the amazing companies that you're building. So all of us are on LinkedIn if you want to reach out to us, if you have follow-up questions, or you can find me on Twitter. Also, I'm Jack_Hampton, JZQ, that is. But thank you so much for coming today and attending.
And guys, the doc that Jacqueline mentioned, if you go to the docs tab on the upper right, you can see that you can download that, some excellent resources. If you want to,
I appreciate it.
If you want to plan your next session, go up to agendas, or you can go outside, do some breathing, practice gratitude, go to the gym, whatever's best for you. Guys, thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thanks, everyone.
Have a good day.
Bye.